Welcome to Womack's wonderful world. Have I got a corker's Christmas story for you today? Yes, it's all about a tiny tree. A tiny Christmas tree. And she doesn't think she's big enough to join in at Christmas with everybody else. And it's called The Tiny Tree by Allan Plenderleith. Shall we begin? Deep down in the dark woods stood a tiny pine tree. The tree was the tiniest in the whole forest, and all she could do was look up at the other trees and dream. She wished one day to be a Christmas tree, dressed from tip to trunk in the finest decorations, surrounded by laughter and love. But the other trees thought she was being silly. Don't be daft. No one wants a tiny tree. They want the big tall tree like me, said one of the big tall trees. Then one day everything changed. The tiny tree began to shake as she heard a great rumbling and buzzing off in the distance. What's happening? She said, quivering. A great growling machine was buzzing through the forest, chopping down the trees one by one. Buzz! The tiny tree was so frightened, she fainted. When she awoke, the tiny tree looked around. Phew, I'm alive, she said, relieved. But wait, where am I? Then she realised where she was, on the back of a truck with all the other trees. She'd been chopped down by mistake. What you doing here? Grumbled the big trees. You're not supposed to be here. You're too tiny to be a Christmas tree. But maybe someone would pick her to be their Christmas tree, she dreamed. Maybe my Christmas will come too. The truck finally arrived in the city, which was covered in Christmas decorations. Everything twinkled. The truck stopped at a market stall, and all the trees were loaded off onto the pavement. But when the tree seller saw the tiny tree, he said, "Oi, what you call this? No one wants a tiny tree for Christmas. I'm not paying for it." And he threw the tiny tree to one side. Oh! But the tiny tree thought the tree seller was wrong. Maybe someone does want a tree as tiny as me. I'll show them. So she stood next to all the other trees, standing on a bucket to get some extra height. But everyone ignored her. They went straight past the tiny tree and picked a big tree to take home. It was like she was invisible. Soon the tiny tree was the only tree left. The shopkeeper shut up shop and went home, leaving the little tree all alone. She walked along the busy streets as people bustled and bashed with their big bags of Christmas shopping. Bash, biff, biff, bash. Then she saw something, a shop window with the most beautiful Christmas tree, filled with bright lights, shiny baubles and twinkly tinsel. "I want to be as beautiful as you," said the tiny tree, and she ran off into a nearby alley. After a minute or two, she appeared dressed from tip to trunk in litter. It was all she could find, but the tiny tree thought she looked beautiful. "Now I'm sure someone will want me for the Christmas tree," she said, and ran back into the street full of excitement. The first thing people noticed was the smell. It was not a good smell. It was a bad smell. Definitely not pine fresh. With pong. Ooh. "Please, can I be your Christmas tree?" said the tiny tree. "Ah, no thanks," screamed the shoppers, running from the stinky stench. Soon the street was empty. The tiny tree walked the quiet streets all alone until she saw the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. A giant Christmas tree, taller than a building. And underneath was Father Christmas. She ran up to him and said, Father Christmas, please can I be your Christmas tree? Father Christmas bent down and picked up the tiny tree in his arms. He looked at her and said, Certainly not, you stinky stick. The only place you're good for is the bin. And with that he threw her into a passing rubbish truck. The tiny tree had a feeling that wasn't the real Father Christmas. The truck passed through the streets and towards the dump. The tiny tree shed a tiny tear. There she was, tipped out with the rest of the rubbish. No one wants me for their Christmas tree, she sobbed. But then she heard some strange sounds. A skittering, a scuttling, a shuffling and a stuffling, a squeak, a tweep, a chirp, a cheep. It was a little mouse, a squirrel and a robin. They had followed the tiny tree all the way from the forest. The little mouse spoke first. Little tree, can you be our Christmas tree? The tiny tree was amazed. You want me to be your Christmas tree? Oh, yes, please, said the squirrel. You're so big and beautiful, just the right size for us. I would love to be your tree, but how are we going to get back? Don't worry, said the robin, and she whistled loudly. Suddenly a flock of robins flew over the tiny tree. The robins lifted her up as the mouse and squirrel hopped on and flew her all the way back to the forest. When they arrived, she was decorated in acorn baubles, winter flowers and holly tinsel. They looked up at the tree, who to them was the biggest, brightest, most beautiful thing they'd ever seen. And the tiny tree's Christmas had come at last, dressed from tip to trunk in the finest decorations, surrounded by laughter and love. The end. Wow, the tiny tree was surrounded by tiny people, weren't she? So she was a big tree after all, and it was the best Christmas ever. The Tiny Tree by Allan Plenderleith. What a great story! Well, I like that one. And sadly, it's time to go. Because I've got things to do at Christmas, just like you. You know, it's a great time, isn't it? Well, it's goodbye. Well, that's wonderful. Have a lovely time, and I will see you soon. Bye-bye for now.